Kesiapan Indonesia menjelang perhelatan konferensi para pihak Conference of Parties ke-26 United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change di Glasgow, Inggris akan memberikan kontribusi terbaik untuk bersama-sama negara-negara di dunia mencapai target upaya pengendalian perubahan iklim global. Indonesia telah meratifikasi keputusan Paris Agreement dengan Undang-Undang 16 tahun 2016 dengan berkomitmen menerapkan Nationally Determined Contribution sekaligus selalu berusaha meraih target tujuan pembangunan berkelanjutan atau Sustainable Development Goals. Strategi Indonesia dalam mencapai NDC dengan kombinasi kerja dua sektor besar penurunan emisi pada NDC, yaitu sektor hulu atau kehutanan dan sektor energi. Pada sektor energi, pemerintah telah mengarahkan untuk disiapkan peta jalan atau roadmap untuk penurunan emisi dari batu bara dengan pengembangan energi baru dan terbarukan EBT, salah satunya yaitu panas bumi. Energi panas bumi akan menjadi sumber energi yang memiliki peranan penting untuk meminimalisir peran bahan bakar fosil untuk memasok beban dasar bagi generasi listrik. Energi terbarukan sangat dibutuhkan, mengingat perubahan iklim kini tengah terjadi dengan skala yang luar biasa besar. Hal itu pun ditunjukkan dalam pemanfaatannya yang tidak bergantung kepada bahan bakar. Panas bumi juga bersifat ramah lingkungan, serta berperan penting dalam kontribusi pengembangan infrastruktur daerah dan perekonomian di wilayah sekitar, serta peran energi terbarukan sangat penting karena merupakan energi bersih yang dapat mereduksi gas rumah kaca untuk mencapai NDC di tahun 2060. Dalam mencapai target Nationally Determined Contribution (NDC), dibutuhkan adanya investasi dan teknologi yang cukup besar serta dukungan kerjasama teknis internasional dan sektor swasta. Pemanfaatan teknologi digital di seluruh sektor termasuk sektor panas bumi menjadi lambang perkembangan panas bumi saat ini, seperti kecerdasan buatan atau IoT, data besar atau big data, komputasi awan atau cloud computing, rangkaian blok atau blockchain, sistem informasi geografis atau Geographic Information System, dan masih banyak teknologi digital lainnya. Kehadiran digitalisasi teknologi dalam sektor pemanfaatan energi bersih menjadikan pengembangan panas bumi menjadi lebih efisien dan diyakini sebagai salah satu faktor pendorong transisi energi, terutama dalam menjaga stabilitas sistem kelistrikan dan mengakomodir peningkatan variabel energi bersih. Komitmen Indonesia dalam transisi energi diwujudkan dengan net zero emission di tahun 2060. Indonesia memiliki sumber daya panas bumi 23 gigawatt dari data tahun 2020 dan hingga saat ini pemanfaatan panas bumi untuk membangkit listrik baru mencapai 2.175,7 megawatt. Dengan total installed capacity geothermal power plant sebesar 2.175 megawatt, akan ikut berkontribusi pengurangan emisi CO2 sebesar 10.875.000 ton per tahun. Dengan demikian, adanya potensi panas bumi yang demikian besar dan dengan availability factor yang sangat tinggi, sangat sesuai untuk menjadi base load green energy dengan potensi mendapatkan carbon credit. Panas bumi mempunyai potensi green economic multiplier effect dengan bisa dihasilkannya green hydrogen dan mineral ekstraksi seperti silika, lithium dari waste brine, waste heat untuk direct use. Sudah selayaknya panas bumi menjadi pilihan utama ketahanan energi nasional serta menjadi andalan IT dalam transisi energi. Saat ini, Indonesia berada di peringkat kedua dari sumber daya dan pemanfaatan panas bumi di dunia, di bawah Amerika Serikat. Pemerintah menargetkan Indonesia menjadi pengguna nomor 1 panas bumi di dunia dalam beberapa tahun ke depan. Sehingga hal ini menunjukkan bahwa transisi energi itu bukan solusi. Transisi energi harus dilakukan dalam menjawab tantangan ketahanan dan kemandirian energi nasional. Untuk dapat mencapai tujuan yang sudah ditetapkan, dibutuhkan sinergitas stakeholder maupun institusi terkait dalam pembangunan. Dukungan demi dukungan akan sangat dibutuhkan untuk terus menggali potensi panas bumi di Indonesia. Dengan seluruh manfaat yang dihadirkan oleh pengembangan panas bumi, harapannya panas bumi dapat dioptimalkan untuk kesejahteraan rakyat Indonesia. Tidak ada alasan untuk menunda pemanfaatan panas bumi di Indonesia tercinta ini.
Distinguished guests and distinguished participants of today's G20 webinar, it is a huge pleasure to be with you here today. My name is Marit Brommer, and I am the Chief Executive of the International Geothermal Association, and I am, on behalf of the IGA, the co-host, together with the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources from the Republic of Indonesia, your hosting of this G20 webinar titled Boosting Geothermal Power. This webinar is part of a bigger theme, and that is under the leadership and the chairmanship of Indonesia, we have a working group under the G20, the Road to Bali. And within that working group, we aim together to promote energy and the energy transition towards sustainable recovery and increase productivity through expanding renewable energy as a whole, but geothermal, of course, specifically, because that's the reason why we're here today. I have a fantastic list of speakers for you, and we have divided this webinar up in two distinctive themes. One is introductory remarks and closing remarks by our distinguished guests, and we have a dynamic panel discussion in the middle of this webinar, where the audience, yourself, can ask the questions to our distinguished speakers. For the first part, I would like to introduce two speakers who will give their opening remarks for today's webinar. The first who is going to speak is Mr. Yudo Dwinanda Priyadi, who is the chair of the Energy Transition Working Group for the G20 Indonesia 2022. After his opening remarks, we will have Dr. Prahoro Nurjayo, who is Mr. Dadan Kusdiana, who is the Director General of the new Renewable Energy and Energy Conservation under the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources in Indonesia. We first go to Pak Yudo, who will give his opening remarks. Over to you, the floor is yours.
Distinguished speakers and participants, greetings to you all. Good afternoon from Jakarta. I am Yudo Dwinanda Priyadi, Chair of Energy Transition Working Group ETWG. Welcome you all at the 11th webinar of the ETWG webinar series on boosting geothermal power. On the brief profile, G20 Indonesian Presidency addresses the main theme of Recover Together, Recover Stronger. The presidency has chosen three pillars: global health architecture, digital economic transformation, and sustainable energy transition. The pillar of sustainable energy transition is held by Energy Transition Working Group, addressing three priorities on accessibility, technology, and financing. We have done the ETWG first meeting in Yogyakarta, 24 to 25 March. We will convene again for the second ETWG meeting in Labuan Bajo, 23 to 25 June 2022. In the first meeting, G20 members and invited countries welcome and endorse the three priorities in energy transition and the main agenda towards the ETWG key deliverables in the ministerial meeting and leaders summit. We call this the road to Bali. In this significance, between the ETWG meetings, we will deepen issues of energy transition through the series of virtual webinars. Today's geothermal webinar will continue energy transition discussion throughout the presidency's year. To the International Geothermal Association, IGA, I would like to convey our presidency's compliment for taking the strategic role as co-organizer of today's webinar. Through this webinar, we want to explore the geothermal power roles in offering solutions for achieving Agenda 2030 and preparing net zero emission future. Why geothermal power still has an important place for sustainable energy transition. Geothermal power globally still has enormous capacity potential to be developed as sustainable energy. Even though only a few G20 members have developed geothermal power in large scale, geothermal potential exists and have also been exploited for power generation in the majority of G20 countries. Globally, it is estimated that merely 6.9% of total global potential has been utilized. The total of global geothermal power potential could range between 35 gigawatt to 2 terawatt. Secondly, geothermal power has ample potential to be tapped as sustainable, versatile, and reliable source of renewable energy. Historically, geothermal power is one of the oldest utilized renewable energy sources, having been first developed more than 1 century ago in Italy. Geothermal power has capacity to ensure supply security of clean electricity. On its optimum utilization, geothermal power plants produce stable and predictable power output 24 hours a day, and 7 days a week. Therefore, geothermal power is a renewable energy source that have essential role as the power baseload. Besides its role in low emission power generation, geothermal power could be seen for its versatility with various technological applications. Geothermal also provides heating and cooling from geothermal heat pumps and heating structure system with direct use application. Thirdly, geothermal power is the future energy with innovative technologies and processes to support its application and financing. The innovative technologies through enhanced geothermal system (EGS) will potentially pivot geothermal as future sustainable energy. Combining EGS and deep direct use (DDU) is projected to extend geothermal as renewable energy thermal energy use. The innovative technology will be greening heating and cooling system in hotels, office buildings, hospital complex, military facilities, and other energy-intensive end uses. The innovative policies on the regulation and financing will also support geothermal to become more affordable and competitive. For example, in Indonesia, the Indonesian government launched the Geothermal Fund and the Geothermal Resource Risk Management Program in collaboration with the World Bank. Those initiatives seek to support high-risk geothermal exploration through financial incentives, regulation, and technical assistance. Finally, to the IGA, all speakers, all delegates from G20 members and invited countries, and all stakeholders. I wish you all have a successful webinar in boosting geothermal power. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pak Yudo, for your inspiring words and also for showing the world how Indonesia is indeed going to be the #1 in geothermal power one day. I am convinced of that. With that inspiring words and also under the theme of recovering stronger and recovering together, I would really like to give the floor to our next speaker, who is going to deliver the keynote and hence the scene-setting presentation for today's webinar. We're going to proceed to Mr. Dadan Kusdiana, who is the Director General of the Ministry of Energy and New Energy and Renewable Energy of Indonesia. The floor is yours.
Thank you, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon to all of you from Indonesia, to be precise from Labuan Bajo of Nusa Tenggara Timur of Indonesia. First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to my colleagues, Pak Yudo, Chair of the Energy Transition Working Group, and also to the International Geothermal Association, IGA, to Ms. Marit Broman for the cooperation in conducting this very strategic and important workshop as part of the G20 webinar series. Of course, I'm honored here to be part of the this G20 side event. And on this occasion, I would like to continue to share with you all the geothermal development in Indonesia, in the country here, as mentioned also by Pak Yudo. So, my friends, ladies and gentlemen, as the chair of the Energy Transition Working Group has mentioned, that one of priority issues of G20 Indonesia presidency is the energy transition. So the transition is very important issue in this global climate situation, where 1.5 degree goal is very still in reach. I think we have to be very optimistic on this situation. The energy transition issue becomes more real after the COP26 in Glasgow, where the Paris Agreement rulebook, the long negotiated operational guidelines of the agreement, was adopted. Hence, it can be our momentum for engaging further commitments from many countries to significantly increase their climate ambition through energy transition and, of course, the energy development, in particular for geothermal. So geothermal is a renewable energy source that provides clean energy for a unique combination of purposes, such as electric power, heating and cooling, and also direct uses. The development of geothermal energy actually is not only belongs to countries as us here in Indonesia that located in the ring of fire of other tectonic plates boundaries. Geothermal energy can also be utilized from a low to medium enthalpy system or much lower temperature system for direct use application. In many countries, geothermal can serve as a bridge toward a sustainable future, supporting the transition from a fossil fuel to renewable-based economy. So now I would like to sharing with you the current government initiative and strategies in the sector. So speaking about geothermal energy in Indonesia, as mentioned by Pak Yudo, we are blessed with more than 23 gigawatt of geothermal energy resources, which spread in 359 different locations across the country. So this is also the good modality for us to develop the nationwide of geothermal implementation. At present, we have 2.3 gigawatt of geothermal plant installed capacity and become the second largest just behind the United States. So in order to achieve the net zero emission target, the geothermal power installed capacity is targeted to reach 18 gigawatt by 2060. This ambitious target will involve many technological innovation and new business schemes to keep the affordability and competitiveness of the geothermal projects. In the shorter term planning, geothermal development is expected to reach 3.3 gigawatt additional capacity until 2030. So this is within 10 years. We are planning to add 3.3 gigawatt. I mentioned earlier that we are now having 2.3 gigawatt of geothermal installed capacity, and those 2.3 gigawatt have been developed for 40 years. So we have 3.3, which is larger than the one that we have currently, the installed capacity, but with the time of less 10 years. This development plan is already mentioned in our general plan for procurement of the PLN. PLN is state-owned company for 10 years to come. So from 2021 up to 2030. Since we have planned to start conducting gradual early retirement of coal-fired power plants, there will be a big baseload demand opportunity in the national power grid system. Geothermal needs to be developed massively in order to take over the load because of its characteristic that's suitable to serve as the baseload. There are also many projects which still have not any contract or commitment with PLN. The exploration process for these projects have been started by the geothermal developers as well as also by the government. Last year, the government have conducted exploration drilling in two areas in West Java and East Nusa Tenggara areas, and will continue the exploration activities in more areas, working together with other ministry, in particular with Ministry of Finance. Later, these potential projects can be utilized not only for utilizing the electricity demand on national grid, but also for other utilization of geothermal derived power, such as green hydrogen production. We are now planning to have one small project, heat process industry, and other direct use application. The massive geothermal development plan will also require several issues to address, and I believe it happened also in other countries, such as the first, resolving the overlapping areas issues between geothermal prospect areas and conservation forest areas by integrating the relevant regulation and collaborative action among the stakeholders. The second is improving social acceptance and community support on geothermal project by, for example, raising people awareness about the benefit of geothermal projects and maximize its benefit by developing direct use application for nearby communities. The third is promotion of technological development, such as deep drilling technology, the exploration for supercritical geothermal resources, utilization of remaining heat from non-productive oil and gas wells, hybrid operation with other renewable energy sources, and carbon capture and storage application in geothermal field. So in terms of regulation framework and policy support for geothermal development in Indonesia, Indonesia is also developing the government is also developing this regulation framework to provide an easiness to renewable developers and to support those innovation opportunities. We are currently preparing several new regulations. The first is the Presidential Regulation and Renewable Energy Development Acceleration for Electric Supply. In particular, this is actually the regulation on tariff coming from renewables. We are also in the process of finalizing the law on new energy and renewable energy law, and also updating the geothermal government regulation on national energy policy. We are also going to introduce the carbon tax scheme and mechanism combined with also the carbon trading that will be initially implemented on a limited basis to coal-fired power plant starting by July 2022 or next month, and gradually involve more industry sectors until all sector will be involved by 2025. We also have award that more private investment is needed, therefore creating an easiness for licensing process on electricity and renewable energy subsector will be very essential, and we will simplify the process through online application mechanism. So lastly, we are going to keep providing attractive financial incentives for renewable energy development, such as tax allowance, import duty facilities, and also the tax holiday. So distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I do sincerely hope that this event will also provide several recommendations and insights for our common principles in accelerating clean energy transition. We call it Bali Compact, as well as also concrete deliverables of Indonesia G20 presidency, in which the second energy transition working group will be conducted tomorrow. It is indeed a great honor for me, the Ministry of Energy and Resources, and also the IGA to organize this event, and we are looking forward for a fruitful discussion with all of you. Thank you. So back to you, Ms. Merit.
Thank you, Pak Dadan. This was so inspiring, and thank you for scene setting of our geothermal boosting webinar. I think personally, on behalf of IGA, that all the ingredients in Indonesia are there when it comes down to achieving the full potential of 23 gigawatt. This is going to be exciting for the entire geothermal community, and we're here to help. With those inspiring words by Pak Dadan, it is now time to move to the dynamic part of this webinar. And that is a panel discussion, which is going to be moderated by Ms. Pri Utami, who I am now going to introduce, who will then take over this part of the webinar by introducing the panelists, and then of course moderate the question and answering at the end of the dynamic session. Ms. Pri Utami, it is not only a personal pleasure to welcome you here. You are the Vice President of the IGA, and I have the honor of discussing with you many times over the past years the potential of geothermal in Indonesia and beyond. But you are also a distinguished lecturer and researcher on geothermal and geothermal technology at the University of Gadjah Mada. And you have a strong academic career. You work closely with the Indonesian government, the sector overall in terms of industry and international organizations such as ours, IEA and IRENA, but also with local communities. As I said, you are part of the IGA since our board term started in 2020, and it has been a personal privilege to work jointly with you to advance geothermal. Bu Pri, the floor is yours for your session. I wish you a fantastic, dynamic webinar. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Marit, for the kind introduction. The chair and co-chair of ETWG Indonesia, the General Director of the New Renewable Energy and Energy Conservation, the Geothermal Director, the Chairman of INAGA, the panelists, the distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I thank IGA and the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources for trusting me to moderate this high-profile panel session. Today, we have 4 prominent panelists who will give us insights on how to boost geothermal power to accelerate energy transition and to achieve net zero emission. The first panelist is Bapak Ahmad Yuniarto, the President Director of PT Pertamina Geothermal Energy. Good afternoon, Pak Ahmad.
Good afternoon, Ibu Pri. Very good to see you.
Good to
morning,
see you.
good afternoon, and good evening all.
Pak Ahmad will share the industry points of view on how to achieve more geothermal development. The second panelist is my colleague, Andrea Blair, or we laughingly call her Andy, the president of the International Geothermal Association. Kia ora, Andy.
Kia ora, everybody. Tēnā koutou katoa. Look forward to speaking to you all.
Andy is going to show the global geothermal perspective and outlook. The third panelist is Ellen Hallgrimsdottir, the Senior Energy Specialist of the World Bank. Good morning, Ellen.
Good morning, Pri, and thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this Geothermal G20 webinar.
Yeah, Ellen will talk about guidelines and the best practices of geothermal financing. The fourth panelist is Mark Taylor of Kairos. Good morning, Mark.
Everybody, thanks for having me. I really look forward to the discussion.
Mark is going to share about the importance of data and the energy transition. Ladies and gentlemen, the discussion will be made after all the panelists have delivered their talks. So please post your questions in the Q&A facility in your WebEx screens. We will fetch them after all the presentations are done. Now, I must not make you wait for any longer. Let's welcome Pak Ahmad Yuniarto. 10 minutes for Pak Ahmad.
Ibu Pri, thank you, and thank you for having me here today in these discussions on how to boosting geothermal power going forward and create a much bigger impact from geothermal resources. When we look into Indonesia, Pak Dadan, our Director General of New and Renewable Energy, has already mentioned the potential resources of Indonesia, and I couldn't agree more that Indonesia has the potential to be the geothermal powerhouse of the world. If we look into the total energy produced in Indonesia last year in terms of electricity energy, there were 18.5 terawatt hours of energy, out of which 18.5 terawatt hours, that is geothermal energy being produced. That constitutes 6.3% of the total electricity energy being produced in Indonesia. And what we expect to see in 2030, that the geothermal energy to be produced in Indonesia for electricity applications will reach 46 terawatt hours. That's constitute 2.5 times of the energy produced in 2021. That is a huge growth. However, we could also see that that is only accounting for applications in the electricity power generations. When we look into the abundance of undeveloped resources, we look into the stability of geothermal power, the dispatchability and system cost competitiveness compared to other sources of energy. I think one key aspect in accelerating and boosting the development of geothermal resources will be to start by defining and designing the value that the geothermal resources could give to a wider society beyond direct renewable electricity. So in this point, what we believe it is very, very important if we together systematically develop the value tree of geothermal resources. So of course, first of all, the value that could be created by having geothermal resources developed as a renewable baseload. However, beyond that, we also need to look into the opportunity to create value by producing green feedstock, the like of green hydrogens, green methanol, and also green ammonia. What could be added into the value tree of geothermal resources is also geotourism. And Ibu Pri very, very familiar with the extension of a geothermal resources into geothermal park, and geothermal park serve as eco-edu tourism, right? That is also a value creation from geothermal resources. We could also add geo-agriculture's applications. As an example, Pertamina Geothermal Energy has a patent already in application of a geothermal steam in enhancing the yield of potato farming. So this is a real example of value creation. And we could go on into a green product, how we could extract minerals from geothermal fluid. And, not forgetting the heating and cooling applications from geothermal resources as well. This is what we call as the value trees from geothermal resources. When we plan the development of geothermal resources going forward, one way to really boosting and accelerating is to focus on the whole value tree. And that will ensure that the multiplication of value that will be beneficial for a wider audience, that will help in garnering the social acceptance as well as the support from a wider constituents for geothermal resources development. And of course, when we look into that value tree, it will need an enabler, it will need a support. And one very important support is creative, innovative, coordinated, affirmative policies. Our Director General has already given an example of some innovations in policy making in supporting geothermal development here in Indonesia. I think it will benefit all of us if we could also add additional supporting policies that will ensure that implementations and development of the whole value trees of geothermal resources, not only electricity, could also be supported. It is very, very important, a second point, in having strong core capabilities, including the adoptions and the utilizations of fit-for-purpose technologies to introduce efficient operations all the way from upstream to downstreams. We are also very, very important here in ensuring to have the certainty in having a reasonable return for every single investment that is being put into developing values from geothermal resources. I think it will play a very, very critical role in unlocking the value in geothermal resources development. And last but not least, it is partnerships. We have a huge potential here in Indonesia, huge untapped resources. I think one way to accelerate the development is through partnerships, and that is also including partnerships in having creative and competitive financing. I think in today's discussions, we will also hear some elements in terms of creative and competitive financing, and that will be one of enabler in unlocking further the geothermal resources here in Indonesia. What about at Pertamina Geothermal Energy? We believe in a three-pronged approach of co-development, co-production or co-generations, and co-processing in as much as possible, creating and making those value trees of geothermal resources beyond electricity is really happening at various stages. But that will be the growth strategy that Pertamina Geothermal Energy is implementing with three pillars. One is expanding current or existing operations, existing assets. Second is to develop a new asset. And the third, what is very, very important related to those value trees of geothermal resources, is extending and creating new values from geothermal resources. And of course, with that three pillars, we are confident that we will contribute for the next 5 years in adding 600 megawatt of new geothermal installed capacity here in Indonesia, with enlargement of our footprint in operations. And definitely, you know, we believe that we could also expand and extend the creation of values from geothermal resources. And hence, we also increase and multiply the impact from geothermal industry in sustainable decarbonization effort, not only for Indonesia, but also for the world. Thank you.
Well done, Pak Ahmad. Thank you so much. Well, audience, we hear from Pak Ahmad the strategy of the PGE, but also the way Pak Ahmad using his wisdom, seeing geothermal as a tree with many multiplier effects, and to enable the tree to grow. Indeed, the tree needs the enabling environment, such as the regulation, the capability and technology, and the certainty in business, and also, last but not least, partnership. Thank you, Pak Ahmad. And
You're very welcome,
now,
Ibu Pri.
yes, thank
Our
you
pleasure.
again. Thank you. And now I would like to invite Andy Blair of IGA. Andy, please.
Ngā mana, i ngā iwi, ka huri ngā mihi kia koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good evening, everybody. My name is Andy Blair, and it's my absolute pleasure and privilege to speak to you about something that I'm very passionate about, and it will become very obvious. Can I please have my presentation? Thank you. So, next slide. There is potentially 1 terawatt worth of geothermal energy still to be realised in the world, and that's significantly greater than the approximately 1.6 gigawatt installed. Now, when we in the geothermal industry hear 1 terawatt of geothermal, we don't think about that number or the size of investment that requires, how it compares to others. We automatically think about how the world would look. And I think this is a significant contributor to the reason that people who work in the sector are so passionate about it. Because that's the world we all deserve and want to leave to those coming behind us. In New Zealand, Māori, our Indigenous people, say that the health of people is determined by the health of the land and the water. And in a 1 terawatt geothermal world, the people and the environment are thriving. Next slide. What we know and what many don't is that using geothermal resources means more than electricity. It means more than a simple substitute for other generation types. It's an electricity plus business case. And what do I mean by that? Next slide. Not only is it the only generation type that can provide baseload power independent of atmospheric conditions, next slide, but post-electricity generation, there is significant value in the remaining heat and constituents of the geothermal fluid. So not only can you generate revenue from electricity, but at the same time, you can create other sources of revenue. And we call this cascade use. And we're standing on it right now. It's the energy from the earth and it's boundless. How would you do things differently if you had endless energy? Next slide. Some of those options for heating for direct use and examples in the world, heating and cooling for industrial processing. So in Iceland, there's a fish processing facility that process fish for fillets, takes the spines and heads as a source of protein and dry them and send them to Africa. Take skin grafts from the fish and use gut oils for nutraceuticals. So there's a real no waste focus and using geothermal in all parts of the process. Next slide, please. Minerals. Now, geothermal fluid lovingly brings us some of the most highly sought after minerals and metals from the earth. The hot fluid comes to surface and brings those minerals from deep underground. And they're strategically important minerals like lithium and many others. This is non-invasive mining. And we have big operations like this in the Salton Sea. An exemplar is in the Salton Sea in the United States. Next slide. Now, there's lots of global conversations at the moment on hydrogen, that it's the transportable fuel that can replace fossil fuels. But hydrogen doesn't exist on its own. The production of hydrogen requires significant amounts of energy, and geothermal can offer that baseload reliable supply to create green hydrogen. And the numbers that are coming out suggest that the levelized cost of producing hydrogen from geothermal is truly competitive. In New Zealand, next slide, we have a geothermal hydrogen project that is producing hydrogen right now. Therefore, and doesn't it look green? Therefore, geothermal electricity is geothermal is an electricity plus opportunity for investors. And it's not just in an economic sense. It can offer solutions to some of the world's most pressing problems. Next slide. So geothermal can provide access to water. So to more and previously unusable water, we can get fluid through geothermal energy production, through wells and condensate in cooling towers. We can use geothermal energy for desalination processes, and there are projects throughout the world. This photo is taken from El Salvador, where they take geothermal steam condensate to water cacao and coffee plants for a commercial operation, where they hire over 600 women from local villages. Next slide. Another solution, geothermal energy can provide food security. Through cheap and efficient heating and cooling from geothermal fluid, we can create environments that don't exist naturally that are suitable for food production. Thus, we can create new opportunities close to demand markets. Next slide. Geothermal energy can support decarbonisation efforts. This is an image that we've all probably seen. This is a very much loved Blue Lagoon in Iceland. And in the very back of the photo is the Svartsengi power station. So geothermal energy can provide electricity and decarbonise tourism and other things at the same time. Next slide, please. Employment opportunities for poor, rural and isolated communities. Next slide. This is a graph here. There's a lot of information, but if you look to the very right of the slide, the FTEs, meaning full-time equivalents, are numbers of people employed. On average, in New Zealand industrial direct use projects require about 100 full-time equivalent people per project, and they are in rural locations with high Māori populations. So the impact is amplified when we can have them in rural communities. Next slide. Geothermal can increase the prosperity of Indigenous peoples and local communities. I have personally seen huge transformation of communities thriving through the development of geothermal projects in their neighbourhoods. One group I'm working with has gone from a small land trust that sit above a geothermal reservoir from tens of thousands of dollars in their bank to within 15 years a company with over $500 million in assets. And they use these investments to reinvest in the well-being of their people through educational, housing, medical and cultural and sporting grants. Next slide. So we need people writing business cases to understand what the true investment and return calculation really looks like. Next slide. To realise this 1 terawatt geothermal future, we have to engage with influential global groups broader than ourselves. We need governments, corporations, investors and societal leaders to know what a geothermal future can offer economically and to wider society. To achieve our climate goals, we can't do more of the same. We need to break existing frameworks and do things differently. Similar to the digital age transformation, we need to exponentially move, create bold and ambitious plans, and act now. Next slide. This is an all of government, all of economy effort that must be resourced effectively to meet the magnitude of the collective challenge ahead. Good intentions are not enough to bring about change. It requires sustained investment, appropriate incentives, and evidence-based interventions. And we need leaders from all sectors of society to demand more. Luckily, geothermal can offer this and is economically competitive right now. Next slide. Oh, no, sorry, back to the last slide. So we at the IGA need to raise our voices so that more people see the opportunity that exists in this space. That choosing to invest in these projects mean you will have a greater positive impact in the world. And that 1 terawatt geothermal world is the one we all want our children to live in. Next slide. So in New Zealand, Māori have this saying, it's a proverb, hei kai kei akuringa, there is food at the end of my hands. And what that means is that we should all use our abilities and the resources around us to create success for ourselves and future generations. And geothermal is one of those resources that can do that. Last slide. So thank you very much for listening to me. I look forward to our discussion. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā katoto, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. It is indeed very highly inspiring presentation. I like the way you combine or you share the your experience with the Maori wisdom. I appreciate that very much, and I think the audience too. And I took note that geothermal provides electricity plus opportunity. All we need is bold and ambitious plans and action. The global geothermal development target is no longer in gigawatt, but in terawatt, which can make our planet and our future generations significantly healthier and happier. Thank you, Andy. To the audience, please do not forget to keep your question and post them in the Q&A application in your screen. Next, let us welcome Ellen Hallgrímsdóttir of the World Bank. Ellen, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Now we will move into a little bit more dry area than then it's very difficult to come after on this inspiring presentation with the topic of financing geothermal project and the enabling environment. Next slide, please. Given the advantage of geothermal power, the question has to be asked why the level of its utilization today is not higher than it is. One answer is that geographically, hydrothermal resources suitable for power generation are not very widespread. However, technology in electrical generation and utilization of direct use is expanding the geographical outreach. Another answer to the question is that from an investor standpoint, geothermal projects are risky with geological exploration risk or resource risk, often considers the greatest challenge and capital intensive. From a project point of view, financing geothermal projects, regardless if they are electrical or direct use, depends heavily on where you are in the project preparation stage and the tasks to be performed. To ensure feasibility of the project, decisions points should be implemented to safeguard that decisions are based on the best available data at every given point in time. The early stages, preliminary survey and pre-feasibility, are the most difficult to finance, and the development of geothermal energy has historically significantly depended on financing resources from the public sector, especially for these stages. With a few exceptions, geothermal development in countries was kickstarted with the aid of the government, international financial institutions, and other organizations that used public funds to provide financing at a lower cost than private market. The public funds are scarce, and what really is the rationale for such support? In theory, public funding for geothermal energy can be argued based on incomplete and imperfect markets. Classical economic theories dictate that in situation of complete and perfect competitive markets, market outcomes are socially optimal. In practice, these conditions are rarely met. There are incomplete and/or imperfect markets, and market forces alone yield suboptimal outcomes which can be improved through public intervention. The critical junction for geothermal development is at the exploration and sometimes at the delineation phase, or pre-feasibility and feasibility stages. When the resources are high, the resource risks are high and costs start to rise, it is here that the private sector has often been challenged to participate with a difficulty to hedge risk. After exploration and after the feasibility stage, the downstream cost increases with the construction of the power plant and associated infrastructure. But their developers have less challenges to attract private financing for development. Next slide, please. Just to demonstrate what I said in my previous slide, here is a visual presentation of the stages in relation to cost and risk. And as you can see, during exploration drilling and delineation drilling, the risk is reduced significantly with relatively high investment costs. As mentioned before, once the resource has been proven, financing of the downstream construction is easier. Next slide, please. But there are several factors that influence the financing and the feasibility of the project. Geothermal project can be designed from the beginning as a cogeneration project, both electrical and direct use. These decisions will influence the complexity and feasibility of project and often the local acceptance. Most common method today for high enthalpy resources is to start by focusing on electrical generation, and after knowledge of the resource increases with operation and consideration is often made and implemented to enhance the revenue streams by adding direct use application. Even though it exists that projects start as a direct use project, up until now that has been rare unless they are only expected to be sole direct use project. But with increased focus on stakeholder engagement and local communities, there is an interest to plan cogeneration with direct use and electricity from the beginning and even start with the direct use part of the project. Also, as mentioned in the first slide, it has a huge impact on financing project if you are adding new units or application to existing plants or if you have a greenfield project. Next slide, please. But even before a project is started and to scale up investment, it is important that government has made plans to ensure that an enabling environment is endorsing utilization of geothermal energy. The enabling environment is of high importance and the project risk can be reduced with good preparation at an early stage. For planning geothermal utilization in a given country, it is important to evaluate the electricity demand to demonstrate that there will be off-takers for electricity or heat in that matter also. Mapping of potential geothermal resources and the available infrastructure will give the government an overview of their estimated potential and investment needed to prepare the sites. An important aspect is to set up a geothermal database that will be operated and updated constantly throughout the geothermal utilization of the country. Furthermore, it is recommended to prepare a preliminary grid analysis or for direct use project how the products will be distributed. To investigate for electrical generation, it is to investigate what reinforcement or connection would be needed to connect each site. All of these studies will feed into a selection criteria where sites are prioritized with cost-benefit analysis. Finally, a target for the generation with geothermal should be set. Some of these studies will overlap with the first stage of the project preparation, but in general, they will be more specific and detailed to each site. Next slide, please. When the government has a target and priority sites, a strategy needs to be decided on how to develop the resources in the country. The strategy developed for the utilization of geothermal resources can be different for each site or even for the whole, or one for the whole country. The targets and the timeline has to be established. The timeline needs to take into consideration changes needed both to the grid or for transportation and for the forecasted demand. It is recommended that at this stage the socio-economic benefits are also mapped, which can be created with the project. But one of the most important aspects is to have adequate and preferably best practices of legal, regulatory and institutional framework. The suitability of the current setup can be analyzed with a gap analysis to ensure and demonstrate for future developers. A market sounding to investigate the interest from private sector is essential, and last but not least, other risk aspect of the project has to be mapped. Next slide, please. On this slide, several options for geothermal development strategy are demonstrated. When selecting a strategy, few questions have to be answered. If the government aims to mobilize private investment, how will the private investor be selected and under what high-level risk allocation? What are the roles and responsibility of the public stakeholders? Does the current legal and regulatory framework enable an effective selection of private developers? And how can socio-economic benefits of a geothermal deployment be maximized? Next slide, please. According to an ESMA study from 2016, successful scaling up of geothermal development has benefited from geothermal support. There are several mechanisms to support the geothermal utilization. A government-supported mechanism, a cost-sharing mechanism, geothermal resource risk insurance mechanism, and early-stage fiscal incentives and mechanism. To the best of my knowledge, there are currently under implementation or preparation 4 mechanisms that focus on cost sharing. These are GREM in Indonesia, RSM in Turkey, GRMF in East Africa, and GDF in Latin America. At least 2 of those also support direct use projects. As you can see, the mechanism can also be regional as well as country focused. Next slide, please. There are several financing institutions and mechanisms available, but this depends highly on multiple factors, and while resource risk and mitigation schemes can be critical for kickstarting and scaling up geothermal development programs, they are not substitutes for addressing various other challenges and risk faced by those investing in geothermal in specific countries. These factors that can undermine the investment climate depending on the circumstances could include inaccurate policies to support the development of the sector, high upfront cost to develop the steam field and the power plant, the availability of transmission or transportation to geothermal site, a lack of basic infrastructure required to provide easy access to this area, limited availability of technical expertise, and the overall counter risk perceived by investors. Next, please. I would like to thank you very much for the opportunity to present at this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you for the guidelines and the examples of the success. And if I may conclude, we got the message that the financing is basically available for geothermal development, but the project structure, planning, and strategy must be clear, and that the risk sharing scheme must be well prepared. Okay, thank you, Ellen. Now let me call to the virtual stage Mark Taylor of Kairos. Welcome, Mark.
Everybody. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. I'm really excited about this and really excited about the initiative of boosting geothermal in Indonesia and around the world. So my talk today is about the importance of data, right, and why it matters in the energy transition. Now, this is a huge topic, and I've been in the research business for a long time now, and I'm a huge proponent of, well, really good data. It all matters. It matters from data on funding, from project finance to economic analysis. It all matters, and it all matters that it's good. Today, I'm going to focus on a really small subset of this data and why this matters in the energy transition, which is satellite data. So using satellites to monitor what's going on in the real world, on the ground, to measure the energy transition. And even a smaller subset of that, I'm going to introduce a topic that might be new to a lot of people on the call, is using satellite data to monitor construction in the energy transition. So this is not to mention all the monitoring you can do of methane and forestry and everything else, but I'm just going to focus on a small subset. Now, this slide deck will be a lot to take in visually, but the message is really simple. We can go to the next slide. Good data can prove activity and pace. So it can prove what's going on and how fast in the energy transition, which are critical in measuring progress to net zero and critical also in preventing greenwashing. So if you remember one thing from this talk, that's it, one thing. It's that satellite data can be used by companies to demonstrate progress and activity. And it can be used by investors to have confidence in what's going on. So we heard, from the previous speakers about financing and about goals of building out new capacity, etc. Now, all of this can be proven by satellite to give everybody confidence in what's happening. And the third thing is that governments can use it to pinpoint their path, pinpoint their position on the path to net zero. And so I'd like to show you how that's done. So just really quick, I'm going to walk you through a couple of examples, and I'm going to go pretty quickly because there's a lot here. It can be used for all these things, from solar farm construction to wind farms to hydrogen plants to EV manufacture to grid storage construction. The list goes on. Next slide, please. And with that, it can be used to produce data that can be used in many applications, like tracking the performance of companies, to communicate to shareholders or investors on capital expenditure, for reporting, to prove that your fund is green, etc. Or my personal favorite is proving the use of proceeds for green bonds. A company says it's going to use green bonds to do X, Y, Z. It can use satellite data to prove that it's actually doing what it said. Now, I'm just going to finish this talk actually by walking you through a couple examples of how this can be used. I know there are several more examples we could go through, and I'm happy to chat ad nauseum afterward about all of those possibilities and examples. But anyway, first example, if we could go into the next slide. Okay, now it's a solar example. Forgive me, I know this is geothermal talk, and we'll get into a geothermal example next. But just to set the scene, this is kind of how this can be used to monitor the progress or challenges of development for a company. So I'm not sure if you're familiar, but in the US right now, there's numerous challenges happening with developing solar and wind, but especially solar in the US. I won't get into them. You can read in the news and what's going on there, but development is proven difficult. But this, is something that investors will want to understand and know about, and companies will want to communicate. Now, this is a project here called Old 300. It's developed by a company called Ørsted, a big Danish developer, and it's a 438 megawatt project that was slated to complete in the end of February 2022. So if you look at the top left, you can see that this project is ongoing from November to April 2022. And clearly in the middle, you can see, and in the bottom, you can see parts that have not been filled in with solar panels. Now, on the right, you can see it's not satellite data, but it's geolocation data. So cell phone, anonymized, fully anonymized cell phone pings that show concentrations of workers in an area installing panels. So when it's red, it means the area is saturated with people that are busy installing panels. And so you can say, hey, that area is under development. And then the satellite data will prove that. So what Kairos found was that, and the bottom chart just shows that that geolocation or cell phone data in graphical form. Now you can see that their activity is still ongoing, well past the expected online date of end of February. Now, we told our clients this on April 19th. If you can go to the next slide. So that construction is late and construction is ongoing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Things happen. The market's tight. The market's tough. And then this was proven, in the Ørsted Q1 earnings call when the CEO said, hey, yeah, the Old 300 project is going slower than we expected and will expect to be pushed to the first half of 2023. So, okay, great. So the CEO's communicated out what's going on. Now the investors understand and have confidence in what's happening at the project. And we've continued to track the project. And as of June 10th, you can see in the purple chart there, purple image there below, that the middle section's been filled in, but there's still the bottom section of the project to be built out. And we've displayed this graphically as well. So up to January, they were completing the project at one pace. But then, when the market challenges happened, you can see that the pace of installation slowed. So this is a really important cue to investors and the market, that development in the US solar is really quite difficult right now. Okay, so now that we've set the scene of how this can kind of be used, let's do just one geothermal example. We go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm hoping most people on this call are familiar with the Sarula geothermal plant in Indonesia. Now, this is an image from 16th of September of 2016 when construction of the power plant had just begun. Now, I'm not going to show you construction of the resource field or the drilling activities in this deck, but we can get into that at another time. But what I want to show you is just a little bit about how we can track the construction of the plant. Because if we saw that in the previous presentation, all of these milestones, there's decision points for investors at each of these milestones. But it can be really hard to understand exactly how far along a project is and how fast or not it is progressing. So a few different ways we can get into this, on a daily basis. We can use synthetic aperture radar, or SAR, to look at metallic structures. So anything that's metal that's being built, we can track its progress or construction. Next, we can use previous slide, sorry. We can use the forest evolution detection with a thing called NDVI. So we can see how much forest is being cut or what the overall footprint of the project is. And again, as we did with the solar project, we can look at construction activity using mobile phone GPS signals. Okay, now next slide. So let's look at the evolution of the Sarula geothermal plant construction. So if you look at July 2016, construction of the site just started. The site had been cleared. There's been some metallic structures going into the ground. You can see it from the top left image. And then between the first two images, or the one that I showed you in the previous slide, where some metallic structures have been added, you can see it in the high-res image. And you can start to see more and more and more, to the point where in the top right, where construction, the progress is flat, the buildings have been installed. And you can see that in the top right image that shows the rectangular shape of the power plant, the cooling towers and the turbine hall. So you can track the construction of the power plant itself. Now, there will be definitely cases where the developer will be asked, what is the footprint? What is the forestry footprint of this plant? And therefore, how can we extrapolate the carbon footprint of the trees that have been removed to build this plant? This can be relatively easily determined. If you could go to the next slide. So you can take an optical image with a satellite from the European Space Agency called the Sentinel-2, and then you can apply an NVDI index to it that looks at vegetation, right? And then you can extrapolate from there and apply a vegetation mask. And this is all pretty straightforward, and I can leave it pretty much there, because based on this, you can see, or it can be calculated that, okay, so the footprint of the Cerula plant is 84 acres of forestry that's been cleared for the power plant itself. And that can factor into the whole economic and environmental analysis of the plant. So I want to leave you with one more thing, one more reminder on the next slide, that with good data, and especially with good satellite data, companies can demonstrate their progress. They can say, hey, we've drilled this much, we've built this much, our footprint is this much, to give investors confidence of what's going on, and what they're buying is a good deal and a good bet, as both, including governments, chart a path to net zero. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Well done. We get your strong message that good data and technology behind them are definitely important in energy transitions, since they help us to see or track the progress and make decisions accordingly. Good quality geospatial data and satellite, for example, make the field development of energy infrastructure become transparent and gives no room for greenwashing. Well done, all the panelists. Thank you very much. And now let us check what is already in the Q&A. Okay. I think I have seen one question here. It is from Ibu Yuditya Prastika. Two questions. The first one is for Pak Ahmad Juniarto. Pak Ahmad, what is your view to explore EGS in Indonesia? Does Indonesia have enough that type of resource, I mean? And then would it be economical to develop EGS? That's for Pak Ahmad. Will Pak Ahmad answer this, and then I will later read the question for Andy. Pak Ahmad, please.
Thank you, Bu Pri. Could you repeat once again the question, just to make sure that I do not miss anything from the questions?
There are three questions, basically. What is your view to explore EGS in Indonesia? Yeah, enhanced geothermal system. And then the question number two, does Indonesia have that type of resources? And then number three, would it be economical to develop that resource?
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting questions. First, quick and dirty answers is, of course, Indonesia will have a potential for enhanced geothermal systems. Would it be economical? That is million-dollar questions, which requires further investigations and research. At this moment in time as well, not only in Indonesia, I think some advancement has been made in other countries in the world in exploring and researching EGS. Definitely, it is still quite early stage at the moment to say that, yes, we could confidently say that EGS is reaching the economic scale level and practicality in implementing it. If we go back into Indonesia, it is from a scientific point of view, from a research point of view, definitely something that we have to put into agenda and seriously investigate in advancing the geothermal science and geothermal operations here in Indonesia. In terms of a priority, I will suggest that for the reasons we still have a lot of untapped proven resources here in Indonesia, then from the capital allocations purpose, I would suggest that that we focus into development of these proven untapped resources. Then we work together, we develop partnerships, not only within Indonesia, but also globally. BUPRI knows very well this space on collaborative research, and we push from the point of view of researching and piloting to advance our understanding on EGS here in Indonesia.
Thank you, Pak Ahmad. I hope that answers Ibu Yudhistia Prastika. And if you still need more discussion, you can find Pak Ahmad. Yeah. And now, yeah, of course, Pak Ahmad welcomes all questions. And now the question for Andy Blair: what kind of strategies that New Zealand has implemented to avoid social issues that can be adapted to Indonesian case? Andy.
Thanks for the question. That's a really important question, and I think it goes to the globe. When we think about geothermal projects, they're often in rural communities, and we have to think about how to be good neighbours, because geothermal projects last for many, many years, 30, 40, 50, 60 year plus. Geothermal reservoirs are there forever, obviously. So we have to think about how projects support and encourage engagement and interest and ongoing support throughout the life of the project. Because when your tire, goes flat, who's going to help you? Not your office base back in the city. It's going to be the people around you, and they must be invested in the project. In New Zealand, we have a strong regulatory framework that ensures that landowners, people who wish to do geothermal projects, have to get permission from the landowners. And the landowners in a lot of the areas where the high temperature systems are owned by Māori groups. And so therefore, it's a negotiating position where Māori groups can have equity stake in projects, or there's all sorts of arrangements to ensure that they have economic outcomes that are aligned with the success of the project. Obviously, projects come and go, but Indigenous peoples will be on those lands forever. And so ensuring their engagement is only good for the projects that we see. And, with geothermal, like I said, it's not just about electricity generation, but we see a lot of these small communities benefit from those industrial direct use projects and heating for homes as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if that answered your question, Pri, or I just talked about awesome things happening in New Zealand.
Is that okay, Ibu Yudhistia Prastika? Yeah. So I agree with you. I think apart for the knowledge sharing to our local peoples, there must be regulatory framework that ensure that all the developer includes the local resources, including the human capital, and also that the nature of the local nature of geothermal energy must be having the benefit. The first one to get the benefit must be the local, isn't it, Andy?
For sure, they can't be forgotten.
Yeah. So now I also see in the chat room, that somebody has already, in the list of participants, I saw that Ibu Neni Saptaji has been raising hands. So Ibu Neni,
I'm sorry.
Please. Yeah, are you still with us?
Yes,
Okay, Ibu Neni, please, to whom you are going to address your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Pri. Hi, Andy. How are you?
Hi, Nini, my friend.
Hi. I think the internet is not so good in here.
I can hear you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes, okay. Thank you. But I cannot hear you, both of you, clearly. But it's actually, I have a very concern about this net zero emission by 2060. I didn't hear Padadan presentation today, but I really would like to know. According to me, it is the net zero emission by 2060 is involved a very large geothermal project in Indonesia, because in addition they are about from 2030 to 2060 will be additional of 4,000 megawatt. For me in Indonesia, there are lot of challenge in here in this case. So I would like to actually to hear opinion from all of you about the plan for Indonesia net zero emission by 2060, because in fact today we actually the current status of geothermal utilization is actually the realization is below the target of decided target of the Indonesia energy plan. I don't know. Is it actually? Would like to hear your opinion. What should we do to to what is it to face the challenge in developing all the geothermal projects in Indonesia to achieve that net zero emission by 2060? Thank you. I hope it is clear for you all. That is my question. Is actually, please help us. So what do you think we need to do to achieve that? Because in my opinion, that is a very ambitious program. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu. So please, the panelists who is going to start answering Ibu Neni. Andy, perhaps?
Thank you.
Perhaps my Indonesian colleague might have some insights into Indonesia's plan and how geothermal can fit that. What I do know, thanks Nini for the question, and it's a question that challenges all countries around the world at the moment. What we do know is that geothermal can offer, opportunities for sequestration. We can use energy to, provide power to direct air capture technologies. We can replace fossil fuels with industrial direct use projects. So if we think about broader than electricity offerings, there are some solutions in the geothermal sector, and I'm sure, we will hear about that. I think a couple of things that I learned when I was at COP26 last year in Glasgow, one of the key things was that we have to do things and not worrying about being perfect, that we must, in order to get the goals that we want to achieve, we must think differently. We can't just do more of the same because it's not going to be fast enough. We need to increase the facilitation of projects. I think all renewable energy projects have significant delays around regulatory space. And I don't mean let's stop thinking deeply about the impact of geothermal projects. I'm thinking about how do we invest in regulatory policies and places that enable things to happen faster, and that we must think differently about how we do things, how money flows, how projects are valued, and priorities are put forward. So that's my view, but I would invite my colleague to talk about Indonesia specifically, perhaps.
Thank you, Andy. Actually, we are running out of time, and I'm sure, well, it's been a very insightful discussion. I know that everyone loves the presentations by our panelists, but unfortunately, we are running out of time. So all the panelists and participants, thank you very much. I think the discussions will not stop here. We can always continue our discussion somewhere else, yeah? Yeah, in the coffee shop, who knows, yeah? And thank you very much. It's been a very, very insightful session. We apologize that we cannot respond all the questions, but we consider that all your thoughts are important. Ladies and gentlemen, the result of this webinar will be brought to attention in the second meeting of the Energy Transition Working Group of G20 tomorrow in Labuan Bajo. Thank you again and good afternoon. I must now return the screen to Marit Bromer. Thank you.
Thank you, Pri, and thank you to all the panelists for their fantastic contributions. It's always a shame time flies so fast, but I'm sure you are all individually available for further catch-ups and hence answering all those questions that we still have. This was very engaging, and it is also very interesting to see that a lot of the discussions are about what are the next steps, what are the actions that we need to do and need to take in order to get to that net zero. And that is where this road to G20 Bali in November is all about. But there is also another very interesting event that is nearer to us in terms of planning. So I would like to invite our following speakers for the final session of this webinar. To talk about one of the upcoming events, still under the G20 Indonesia's presidency event, and that is the 8th Indonesia International Geothermal Convention and Exhibition, in short IIGCE 2022. And this information session will be delivered by Mr. Priyandaru Effendi and by Mr. Riza Pasiki from our distinguished Geothermal Association of Indonesia, in short, INAGA. Please, the floor is yours, Pak Pri, for taking over and guiding us towards the next IIGCE event. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Marit Bromer. It's great to see you again. Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure for us from INAGA to be here in the webinar G20 Indonesia Presidency for the discussion of boosting geothermal power in Indonesia. As already been introduced by Ibu Marit, my name is Priyandaru Effendi, and I am the chairman of Indonesian Geothermal Association. And now I am accompanied by the chairman of IIGCE 2022, Bapak Riza Pasiki, who will present the itinerary of the IIGCE agenda right after this. We thank, of course, the G20 Energy Transition Working Group Committee for including this IIGCE event as part of post-ETWG G20 side event. We are convinced that the event will still provide more leverage to the G20 summit meeting, which one of the pillars is to focus on sustainable energy transition. The establishment of the year's theme, Geothermal, the sustainable energy for green recovery, energy transition and security, fits with government's energy transition plan to massively support the development of geothermal Indonesia to meet the target as set out in the National Energy Plan. We are now pleased to inform you after 2 years of having the event conducted online without exhibition. This year, this event will be held in hybrid, which most of the activities will be done through offline, including the exhibition. Now, without further ado, I'm handing over the floor to the chairman of IIGC, Pak Riza Pasiki. Thank you. Pak Riza, the time is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Again, thank you for the opportunity given to INAGA to share the information about our annual event of the 8th Indonesian International Geothermal Convention and Exhibition. And I'm Riza Pasiki, the chairman of the event. So, taking the theme of the geothermal, the sustainable energy for green recovery, energy transitions, and security, we will be focusing our discussion to address the challenges as well as the opportunities for geothermal to be the important part of the solution on a global issue of the climate change. So like Pak Pri mentioned, after 2 years in row conducting online due to the COVID-19 pandemic, so this year the event will be conducted in combination between the offline seminars and the exhibitions with the several online technical seminars. So the 8th IIGCE 2022 this year is hosted by KS Orka Renewable, one of the international geothermal developer with 9 geothermal projects here in Indonesia. Please go to the next slide. So the 8th IIGCE 2022 consists of 3 main agendas, the convention, the exhibitions, and the field trip. So we have sent the invitations to the President of Republic Indonesia, Pak Jokowi, to open the event, as well as to do the launching on the COD of several geothermal projects in Indonesia, such as the Sorik Merapi Unit 3, 50 megawatt, Sokoria Unit 1, 5 megawatt, and the Rantau Dadap Unit 1, 91 megawatt. So, and then the opening session will be then continued with opening and launching of the exhibitions. The convention event will start it with the plenary session number 1 with the topic of the legacy of geothermal in supporting the climate change for the greener world. So we will invite the world-class speakers, including the Minister of Energy and Mineral Resource of Indonesia, President Director of the Pertamina, Mr. Satya, and also some representatives from IGA as well as from the Renewable Energy Society of Japan. And the second plenary sessions basically will be the sharing of the experience from zero to hero by the leaders of geothermal developers company in Indonesia, including the KS Orka, Pertamina, Geodipa, Supreme Energy, Medco, Star Energy, and Mitsubishi. One of the key pillars for the convention is the technical sessions. So so far we have received 121 abstracts, consist of 92 technical papers from industry and 21 from the universities. So Inaga will also provide the valuable opportunity of this event for all participants and the geothermal stakeholders to talk each other and engage each other on the network events, so including the dinner events and also the golf activities. Next slide, please. So the second pillar of the IIGC event this year is the exhibitions. So far, there has been 22 company confirmed their participations, and the companies consist of the geothermal developers, the service company, technology provider, and also the regulator. So again, on this opportunity, the Inaga would like to invite your institution to participate also on these exhibitions. Next slide. Last but not least, Inaga also invite you to join the field trip as part of this IIGCE. So the field trip will be conducted to Sokoria Geothermal project between 16 to 18 September 2022. So this is a very exciting geothermal project. This is located in a very beautiful area. As you can see on the picture above, the project area is near to the Three Colors Lake of famous Kelimutu and East Nusa Tenggara, with a very fantastic traditional environmental around the project area. And one unique thing about the Sokoria project is that this is the first geothermal project in Indonesia that is utilizing the medium enthalpy resource for the electricity generation. The temperature of this resource is not greater than 220 degrees C so far. So, and this project itself just finished the COD of Unit 1, 5 megawatt, and currently the project is undergoing the construction for the Unit 2 with a 3 megawatt size. Next slide. So see you in September in Jakarta, and everybody is welcome to join the event. Thank you very much.
Pak Pri and Pak Riza, thank you so much. I'm tempted to say, see you there. This was a fantastic overview of what's going to happen in September. And I think your images of the field trip sold me personally, and I guess the entire community as well. So well done. And also thank you very much for the invitation to the global geothermal community to come and engage and share the global experiences and learning from how Indonesia is developing and advancing further. With that, we are coming almost to the end of our G20 Energy Transition webinar, Boosting Geothermal Power. And we have final closing remarks from a distinguished speaker, Mr. Harris, who's the Director of Geothermal at the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. So, Mr. Harris, I kindly invite you to take the stage and conclude the seminar of today. Mr. Harris, the floor is yours.
All distinguished speaker and participant, greeting to you all. Good afternoon to all of you from Indonesia. I am pleased to conclude this webinar on boosting geothermal power. In today's webinar, we have been exploring the perspective for reinventing and maximizing the role of geothermal energy in meeting the future world's energy needs through best practices, global analysis, and way forward. Reflecting on those comprehensive topics, let me highlight several essential points. First, geothermal energy still holds the enabling key towards a clean and sustainable economy. Geothermal can play dominant roles of providing sustainable baseload electricity, heating, and cooling industries, as well as attractive sustainable tourism activities. For example, by implementing cascade utilization of geothermal energy, we can maximize the benefit of geothermal projects so that they are not only be able to produce power generation, but also can be used for many direct use purposes. This way, geothermal development can help decarbonizing economy and increase prosperity of indigenous people, women, and also local communities. Second, innovative technologies and business scheme will continue to strengthen geothermal contribution in achieving sustainable development goal and net zero future. Boosting the geothermal development will require innovative technologies to enhance their affordability and ensuring its sustainable production. There are many new opportunities, such as green hydrogen production, hybrid operation with the other renewable energy source, mineral extraction, and carbon capture and storage, which will increase the attractiveness of geothermal project. Third, boosting geothermal development is also require more investment, both from the public and private sector. The government of Indonesia has launched several risk-sharing mechanisms and fiscal incentive to reduce the geothermal project risk. Hopefully, this program will open more geothermal development, especially in the greenfield area. Fourth, we also have learned about the utilization of technological information and data analysis to measure the pace of energy transition. This technology can measure the construction progress of new green energy projects, tracking the fossil retirements, and estimate the greenhouse gas emission. Finally, collaboration and cooperation in geothermal development must be enhanced. This is important to reduce the gap in disparity in the technology and business innovation and to improve technological and industrial partnership. All this will be a pivotal momentum to assure energy access, availability, affordability, and security. So the transition toward net zero emission will leave no one behind. Moving forward, we are planning to amplify the recommendations, practices, and experiences in utilizing geothermal for green economy in the content of the key deliverable of G20 ETWG in the ministerial and leaders level. Join us, we continue to the G20 ETWG virtual webinar series. I look forward to seeing you all soon in the next webinar. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum.
Pak Harris, thank you so much for these wise words. We will leave no one behind. I think that is crystal clear that that's the only way that we will achieve all the sustainable development goals, including sustainable energy for all. With those closing remarks, we have come to the end of today's webinar, boosting geothermal power. And we all hope, on behalf of the IGA and the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources, as the two co-hosts of today's webinar, that you found this as fruitful and also that we have engaged on one of the most important topics, and that is advancing and accelerating geothermal in Indonesia, but also beyond. The recommendations towards the G20, the road to Bali, will be taken forward in separate webinars, one of them tomorrow. So I thank all the speakers today, from the introductory and scene-setting remarks of the earliest ones in the morning, the panel discussion under the guidance of Bupri, and of course the closing remarks by both the President of INAGA, Pak Pri Effendi, and Pak Riza, including Mr. Harris, by finishing it all off. We take all those recommendations and make it a nice overview summary statement that goes all the way to Bali in November. I would like to thank you, my dear participants, for staying with us, to listening, but also sharing your ideas, your thoughts, your questions in the chat. We were, of course, always are limited in time. If you have remaining questions, do not hesitate to reach out to the individual speakers and panelists. They're here to help and answer all the questions. With that, I would also like to thank the Ministry and the team under the G20 Energy Transition Working Group. You have been an amazing help to put this all together. As co-host, I can easily say that without you, this would not have been possible. So thank you for all the logistical and technical support. And with that, I truly hope to see you again on one of the other upcoming events under the G20 Energy Transition Working Group webinars, and of course live at certain events later in this year. With that, I would like to reiterate the theme of the Indonesia G20 presidency, and that is recover stronger, recover better. I wish you a good day. Thank you so much.